I'm Anna.
And I'm Kent.
And this is Film and Family. If you're ready to take your film career to the next level without sacrificing a healthy and satisfying personal life, you're in the right place. Hit subscribe to never miss an episode.
Let's jump right in. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about evaluation and how we can use evaluation to learn from failure. So, Anna, why don't you take us away on this topic a little bit?
Yeah, so first I just want to talk about how do we learn from failures. I think we've touched on the importance of learning from failure and the importance of failure in this podcast a lot, but I want to get into the specifics of how do we do that.
So as a recap, everything we've taught so far about failure can be summed up in failure is good. I think that pretty much sums up everything we've talked about on that particular topic. But it's hard. Hard is good also. Failure is good. Hard is good. Because it has like 2 or 3 times the potential for growth as success does. And so we want to be looking for failure, looking for obstacles, looking for hard, looking for all those things and evaluate it and really dig deep into it. And so, we're going to do that a little bit on the podcast today. We want to evaluate some things from our day together. But before we do that, we want to just talk about the principles of evaluating and evaluation.
Yeah, so I kind of wanted to ask you personally, Kent, what you do or what you found that works for you to evaluate your failures.
I don't have any failures, actually. So,
failure to find failures.
Yes. How do I improve this skill? I think the first step for me has been it's just been a lifelong thing for me to learn to slowly shift my attitude about failure, from being this thing that's like devastating to being this thing that's like normal to being this thing that's actually good, and recognizing, it's not like I'm always like, oh great, I messed up, but I think I'm just learning in there's lots of facets of our lives. And so sometimes in some parts of our life, we're like, oh yeah, we accept failure as like this creative thing that we have to just kind of go through as part of a creative process of improvement. And then in other parts of our lives, we're still petrified of failure. And so I think it's just slowly shifting my attitude. I think that's the main thing. Your question was, how do I...
Like what your process is
of learning from failure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think my biggest thing is I'm kind of extroverted, so I talk a lot. So I think it helps me to talk with people. So I created this podcast anyways. But I think speaking about things with you helps a lot. Being able to always just bring up everything and talk to you about, okay, so this thing happened. I was trying to do this and this happened instead, or I messed up this way or whatever. And we just openly talk about failures in lots of different things, and just being able to have a place to speak safely. That helps me a lot. If you don't have that, I also think that it can be good to journal a little bit and have a process of journaling. I don't know if I've used my journal in that way as much, but I've definitely talked with you a lot. And before that, I probably talked to my dad about some stuff. I think growing up, he was the one I would probably talk to the most. Siblings. Talking is good. Yeah. So there's people. I think we all have someone. But not all of us have that personality that is the best thing. But whether you're an introvert or an extrovert or whatever personality thing you fit into, I think talking is huge.
Yeah.
What about you?
Well, I actually do feel like I've gotten this into more of a process over time. I don't think I always had a good process, but I certainly have developed one now. And I can't say that I'm one of those people who does celebrate failure, though I know there are people who actually set goals to fail and will celebrate their failure. I agree that the mindset is huge of just letting myself learn from failure. It's easy to say about other people, but when it's myself, I think I sometimes I'm not as compassionate.
Well, and that's like really the reason I think that's like such an important first step is that even if you have all of these like really healthy habits of like evaluation, if your attitude about failure is still like, deep down subconsciously, if you're actually being honest with yourself, if your attitude is, well, everything will be better if I just stop failing. Like, I just have to stop this thing and I'll be better and everything will improve. Then like, you're actually going to kind of block yourself, I think, from having like a really productive, honest evaluation. If you're super afraid of failure, it's hard to openly even admit to yourself, even if I'm just talking to myself or writing it down on paper, like what went wrong and what could have improved and why did it go wrong? Sometimes things go wrong because we have to be honest about our actual desires and our, where we're at. And I'm speaking about sort of life failures, like personal failures, more than creative failures. I think it's easier. Sometimes when we're very new at a creative discipline, failures can be more frustrating or difficult, especially criticism can be more difficult, but you eventually get used to that really quickly. But I think when it's like marriage and you have like personal failures and like just the way you act or the way you do things or say things, it's like, for some reason, when there's a relationship at stake, it's just a lot harder, I think, to be like completely open with that. I feel that way with my kids as well. Like, it's just hard to be like, all right, step back and like neutrally from like a good emotional space, like evaluate when I'm like still like emotionally volatile. So.
Yeah. I don't know that like in the moment is always the best time.
Right.
But sometimes it can be just fine. I would say that there's basically 4 steps that I would follow in an evaluation, and maybe we can run through those 4 steps as we evaluate. For example, our relationship with our kids today, we felt like we kind of struggled this evening, and so maybe we can...
Struggled sounds so clinical. It's like when you go to the doctor and they're like, oh, you're going to feel some pressure. And it's like, this is going to hurt really bad. It's like we struggled. I don't know.
It was a hard day in some ways. So anyway, before we get into that, here are the 4 steps. So first, I have found it's very helpful to find the facts, to separate out the facts, to look at what the facts are, because sometimes I get really stressed about like our money situation or something, and I haven't actually even looked at the log or the bank account, or I didn't have a log for a long time. And so... Yeah,
that was a learning curve.
Yeah, I started to learn that when you actually look at the facts, I felt a lot more confidence, because even if there were parts that were bad, I knew exactly what they were. And
we weren't like we found that we got really stressed when we rounded numbers. Like, oh, I think we owe this much, and I think we have this much, and I think there's this much coming from this or that place. And then you like actually do the hard math and go, there's this many dollars and this many cents here. There's this many dollars and this many cents here. Mm-hmm. Every time we felt better after we looked at the really hard facts.
Really useful. Have some sort of log, whatever you're evaluating, some sort of record of it, so that you can actually see what's happening factually. And then noticing that failure is just subjective. It's just a thought. Like, it's only a failure if you decide that it is. And, but the facts are there. They are concrete. And so we can look at those. And then the step after that is to see what worked. And I think this is really important to do first and to not skip over, because what we focus on, we create more of. And so if all we're focused on is the problems, we create more problems. We start to get this really negative mindset of, even though we're problem solving, we're still, or at least we think we are, we're still looking for problems. And so we're only going to find problems. But if we're also looking for what went well, then we'll see what's working, and we can focus on solutions as well and create more of that.
That's already helpful. Now that you're going through that, I'm already kind of jumping ahead of my mind and kind of evaluating my relationship with my kids today. And
this will be good.
That's a good step. That was a step I definitely was not doing before you mentioned that.
It's an easy one to skip, or even when I know to do it, I sometimes am like, oh, whatever.
We kind of like, sometimes that part, I feel like we always get like lip service too. We're like, oh, like
I'm sure some things worked, but here's what didn't work.
Yeah. Let's get on with it. Like we know why we're here. But that is why we're here. We need to focus on that equally, if not more, than the other stuff. Because you're right. If things are working and we're not seeing it, I'm thinking about my relationship with my kids, but it's easy to see from a creative process that if there's parts of the movie that are really working and you don't note that, like let's say you do a test screening, there's parts that are like really funny or really suspenseful and you're like, wow, that's dynamite. But you don't actually like super take note of the way the audience is reacting or the way you can feel the room, or you don't write it down. Then you might later, a month later, find that you've like cut that thing on the editing room floor and you've like,
or you don't know how to create it again because you never paid attention to how you achieved that.
Yeah, something that worked and why it worked. Yeah. So, yeah, it's very important to take note of those things that are working. If you focus on it, then you can create more of that type of success, whether it's a relationship-based thing or a career sort of more, I don't know.
Yeah.
Professional thing.
I mean, even I think about this with my prayers. Like if I'm praying, I try to focus first on what I'm grateful for before I start asking for things.
Yeah, it's like, God, you did some things really well today. And here's some things I'd really like to see improved. Could you make sure that the tree, when it blows down, goes toward the street and not into my house? That's something we were praying for this morning because it was like super loud winds.
That's crazy.
And we have some weak trees in our yard that we need to save up money for to chop down.
So let me just review where we're at. So we're halfway through. Step 1, look at the facts. Step 2, what worked. And I think this verbiage is really important. Instead of saying, in what ways am I successful? In what ways am I good? Like connecting it to your identity or like your own worth is just to say what worked and to look at it with curiosity like a scientist. We're just experimenting with things that work and things that don't.
Yeah, it's not what are you good at, what are you bad at. It's what worked. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, even calling it a failure is kind of like, I don't know. You might, I kind of just prefer to say what worked and what didn't work. Instead of like what was a success and what failed. But it's the same idea. Step 3 is what didn't work. So then you just, excuse me. You look at what did not work the way that you wanted it to. And then step 4 is what do I want to do differently? Because there's no point in looking at that and not doing anything with it. So just, it's again kind of refocusing on a solution. So you take those things that didn't work and say, well, what do I want to try next time? What do I want to do different?
You know what I find striking about that last question is there is no question in there, which is what do I want to do the same? That might be
That's a good point.
Sort of helpful, but I also think it isn't helpful because I find that when I have a success, the reason success doesn't lead to much growth often is because we look at the success and go, how do I repeat that over and over again? And then we start to like copy ourselves and become derivative of ourselves. And I find that, at least like in the art world, that never leads to good songs or good movies or good paintings. Like when they're just like, oh yeah, I did this thing and I'm just going to like copy myself over and over. Like, oh, that song was neat. How did I like capture that thing in that song? It's not like a bad thing to try and do. I just think like, what am I going to do differently? Even if you succeeded, it's nice to say, well, what am I going to do differently? Because I learned some things, but like, let me try some like different things that are similar to that or maybe really different from it so I can learn around that thing and understand that success better. But like, you're looking for principles. You're not just looking for, oh, this one action yielded a laugh in my movie, or it yielded this nice emotional response from this person, like my kid or my spouse or my coworker. And so it's like, I don't know. I like focusing on what am I going to do differently, even when you're analyzing your, what worked stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to just, it is the last question. And I think it's after you've evaluated both what worked and what didn't, what do I want to do differently could apply to either category. If there's something you want to repeat or to create as part of your process, you might implement that into the process. And then what do I want to do differently? You might look at what you want to change about it. But yeah, I love how you could focus on both.
Yeah. So I guess maybe we can move into our day.
Yeah, let's do an example.
So I like to do that example. So the first step is what
are the facts?
Happened. Yeah, what are the facts? What happened? That's sometimes the question I find myself asking, but I have a lot of emotional baggage behind the question in a non-healthy way. It's, okay, I'll just try and focus on bedtime. I'll eventually analyze the whole day. I guess, no, I'll just do the whole day.
I think the evening is really...
But I want to point out, like, I guess I'm trying to jump into what worked about the day. Today, I just felt like the day ended really rough. Just for some reason, I felt like frustrated and impatient with the kids the whole time. But what happened? So we finished dinner. The kids kept wanting more food, which isn't a bad thing.
So they asked for more food.
So they asked for more food, and I gave them more food. And they asked for more food, and I gave them more food.
It sounds so lame when you just boil it down to the facts.
But you guys, I was totally justified in all of my emotional responses, but then they asked for more food and I gave them more food. And then you made like this yummy bread stuff that still isn't done.
Bread.
And then baby cried a lot. So she cried probably
a lot is subjective, but
50% of the evening she was crying versus the other 50% in which she was toddling and looking around. And she was occasionally walking up to you and lifting her arms in a desperate plea for, I don't know what, because at one point you picked her up and she seemed to be reaching for something else. I wasn't paying attention. So the other things that happened were bedtime. The kids were still asking for food after probably an hour or an hour and a half of just eating straight. And they eventually stopped asking for food, and I told them to get their PJs on, and they didn't. And their room was really messy, meaning there were lots of clothes and books on the floor. Lots meaning, I'm trying to be specific. There's probably dozens of clothes and dozens of books on the floor. And we cleaned them up.
We told Adeline to go potty. And
she didn't. And then we picked her up and Anna made her go potty, basically.
Put her on the potty.
Put her on the potty until she went herself.
And she said, I can't.
And you lectured her on
3 times.
How that's not true. And I yelled probably a few times at them to do what I was telling them to do and not ignore what I was saying. And then we read some scriptures and we said a family prayer and we put them to bed and explained the rules about why they don't come out of their room once it's bedtime and what they get as a reward in the morning. And then they came out and
this
wanted
is kind of a long
story.
Evaluation to do the whole
Too long.
day.
I'm just trying to say it all factually because this is like the whole time I was feeling very emotionally bad.
Yeah, I think just analyzing one like
very
bedtime,
specific
or the potty thing, or
I would say
whatever.
Just bedtime. Well, so if I moved on to what worked, well, they got to bed.
They're in their bed now.
It's
quiet. The door's locked, so they're not out of their room.
Yes, if we closed it all the way, which sometimes we don't do. So the door is locked. They are in their rooms. They are quiet, so I assume that they are in the process of sleeping or falling asleep, or being quiet, which is totally fine.
They have used the potty.
They
are in their pajamas.
Have used the potty. They are in their pajamas. I know they ate a lot tonight. I know they're not hungry. I mean, if they're feeling hungry, I guess I don't know that, but they have
full tummies.
They have enough caloric intake to survive the night. So I feel like that's success. Yeah. That worked. Let's see.
We read scriptures and prayed.
Yeah, we did read scriptures and we prayed.
We hugged everybody.
We did all hug. So that was a success. I guess that worked, I should say. Okay.
That's pretty good.
So that
list of things that did work.
They are there and they did. Yeah.
We've had worse bedtimes.
I mean, as far as the whole day, I have lots of things that I feel like worked throughout the entire day.
Well, let's just
even though I
on
still feel negative about the most of the day.
We've got to keep this short today.
Yes, we'll evaluate the length of our podcast afterwards. What didn't work? I yelled. I felt very upset the whole time. I didn't feel happy or like I enjoyed the process. And I want to enjoy the process of putting my kids to bed. Some parents don't get to do that, and they wish they did get to. And I would like to feel grateful for that. And sometimes I do, but tonight I didn't. And they did come out. And I didn't give them a story, which they're used to, which I think was the main reason they wanted me. And I just felt like it got too late, and they weren't very obedient, so I didn't feel any need to give them a story. But it didn't really lead to a very successful going downness.
So here's something that I'm remembering now as we're going through this example, which is that when you're evaluating, we have to be careful to only evaluate yourself.
I see. So failure on their part to go to bed or not
has nothing to do with
I
you.
cannot evaluate that.
Just what did you do about it?
What did I do? That is a very important thing. And, it gives a lot of us a lot of heartache in life to be evaluating everybody else all the time because of the things they do or don't do, when we really should just be evaluating ourselves.
If we're calling it a failure that they came out of their room, for example, that has nothing to do with me. Like, how I choose to respond is what I want to evaluate.
Yeah.
Because otherwise I'm going to just try to control them so that I can feel good about myself as a parent. But
yeah. So I guess I can't say that that's a failure. The failure was, or I guess what didn't work was that I yelled. And some things probably took longer than they would have if I'd have been a little more... had more positive attitude. I think if I'd have made it bedtime more fun, they probably would have actually gotten ready for bed faster, and I probably would have been more patient and read a story with them. So the main things are, I didn't have as much fun or enjoyment out of bedtime as I would like, and I yelled more than I would like. So those are things I don't think worked.
Yeah.
So what do I want to do differently? I would like to not yell.
What came to my mind too is not rush, because I feel like rushing always takes longer.
Always takes longer. It does.
And I was rushing, and I was kind of forceful and, throwing her on the potty, pulling her off, washing her hands, pulling her pajamas on,
just let's get it done.
Yeah, but then that leads to a lot of resistance and crying, and then it just always takes longer when I'm trying to rush.
We're getting real. So real. Well, hopefully no one listens to this episode. Man, we don't want to. This is depressing. Anyway,
I think they'll only judge if they
hopefully those with kids will say, wow, they understand me. But this process of evaluation, I just want to point out, I will move on to the things I can do differently, but even just pointing out the facts, what worked and what didn't work, has really helped me to emotionally sort of steam down and I feel a lot better already. And I think the next time, not rushing, but I think the main thing is just thinking in my mind, it's okay. I don't need to get this done super fast. It's okay if it takes a few extra minutes. It's going to take a few extra minutes if I rush anyway. So I might as well enjoy it if I go over time anyway. And I could make this fun. And so I think just focusing on making it a happy process for them. Mm-hmm. Obviously they can still emotionally have a hard time. Even if they're oh, but I want to, I don't know, I want to stay up all night and play video games. It's a silly example to give with a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, but I'm just giving a wild example, and I'd probably just say no, and then they might throw a fit and cry. So I can't force them to make it happy, is what my point is. But I still feel I can still think about that.
Yeah.
I'd like to do stories. I know they enjoy stories, and I'd like to read them, and I like to make things into games, and that's better than just yelling at them and telling them what to do. I think that would work better.
Well, we could have read a story by the time we got them down after they were upset about not
getting a story. Right?
It took just as long to calm that
we can
down.
Make rules about what they have to do to get stories in the future if we want to, but it's up to us. But I don't see any point in doing that. So.
Yeah, I think what comes to mind for me is just being an example of the calm I want them to feel at bedtime. So if I can...
I am calm.
Well, really, though, bedtime is like a winding down, and the lead up to that, I think, should feel relaxing and calm and loving.
Sort of set the pace.
Yeah,
the pace
slow everything
setters.
down. And then I also think focusing on one thing at a time would have helped me, instead of... I always see bedtime as this whole huge list of things we have to get through before they go down. And I love when the kids are asleep and I can finally relax and have a little time.
And record podcasts.
Yeah, and hang out with you guys. So I always think I kind of rush to the finish, like, okay, I'm almost there. We're going to make it. And I would rather just take it one step at a time. Okay, I'm going to change the baby's diaper. What's next? Going to put pajamas on. Okay. Smaller increments are easier to deal with. It's that whole life by the inch is a cinch.
Life by the yard is hard. And life by the inch is a cinch.
Yes.
Something like that.
So when it's really hard, I think just sort of zooming in, focusing on the moment you're in can be helpful.
Yeah. And just like sometimes being factual after the fact is the process of acceptance. It's like saying exactly what happened and ridding it of all of the positive or negative drama. And then we kind of just accept it for what exactly it was. Like I yelled at them to get their pajamas on and they cried about this or that. And
even I yelled is not totally factual. You'd have to say like
I increased my decibels.
I told them to get their pajamas on at a higher decibel than I usually.
Well,
I don't know.
Or I spoke with the intention of being loud and being heard. Anyway, but I don't know if we have to be too insane about. You could say I yelled in testimony in a court. But my point is, what was I saying? Oh, that it's just this process of acceptance. This factual part is very important where we lay out the facts, but we're doing that looking backwards. And I think that sometimes it's very healthy. I find when I'm doing my best as a parent is when I'm actually in that factual mind of acceptance in the very moment where I'm just like, okay, she's crying and that's okay. Like, I'm just like, I'm in that space right then and there. Now, I'm not always, and I have lots of failures, but I do want to just point out that I think the reason that factual step is so helpful is because it sets us in this accepting sort of mindset, and we can adopt that mindset in any moment as well. Now, if you're not feeling it one day, that's okay. But when I actually do focus and say like, oh, okay, well, none of this can hurt me. Like they're just crying and, oh, like I can do something to help and I'm going to try this or that. Okay, that doesn't work, but maybe they just need to like kind of process this emotion and move through it. I'm just kind of accepting of the whole thing. I'm like, okay, that's fine. Like I'm just very factual about it. And so I like that I can adopt that in the present tense, but if I can't if I don't end up doing it, the evaluation process helps me at least post everything adopt that mindset so that I can still learn from it, even if I didn't maintain it in the very moment. So
yeah, I find that it's helpful for me because I start to see where I'm dramatizing the story. And not that that's bad. It's good to have thoughts and opinions, and we always are kind of telling stories in our heads, and that's okay. But just recognizing that that's optional and that I'm creating that drama is kind of humbling sometimes. I know sometimes I recognize it in myself where I have this whole story of he was so rude and said this terrible thing or whatever. And then in the end,
about that, by the way,
no, I was thinking of a specific example of Marshall. One time he yelled at me and I can't remember what the words were exactly, but it was like, I want more lasagna or something like that. When I boiled it down to the fact, like he said, I want more lasagna. It just sounded so lame. And I was like, man, I made that mean like all this terrible stuff about our relationship and his intent and that he hated me and he was being so rude and he was ungrateful and all this stuff because of...
I remember you doing this sort of thought download.
Yeah, I think I might have told you about it.
I wasn't there and you like told me like, these are the facts. And then you like laid it out and I was like, I think that sounds like a fine evening to me. And you were like, no, but it was terrible.
No, but it was, I was able to laugh at it because I was able to see where my brain made it so dramatic.
Almost instantly comical. I mean, there was a little bit of that even just tonight. I was like, okay, there was like 20 books on the floor and there was clothing on the floor, which isn't like horrible. Like, there have been people who have had diseases and stuff. Like, I don't know. It's like, okay. And then there's like that. And then I yelled at them, which is, I still feel bad about, but like at the same time, it's like, you know, it's, you know, you boil down the facts and acceptance is a great place to start when you're going to change something. So, that was really helpful. I want our listeners to know that, although we're talking about family stuff, which is really, I think relationships are just a great place. I do like talking about the craft of film, and I like talking about even some of the logistics of film, and those details, because it can be really productive. But I also really like talking about relationships a lot, because even in filmmaking, man, that's what it's all about. Stories are all about relationships, and being on set is all about working relationships and working with actors and working with performances and, you know, massaging an edit, all of that, it's all relationship based. And so when we can understand our real world relationships a lot better, and our family dynamics and our, whatever, I think that we experience a lot of growth as creatives as well. And so I hope that this isn't too hard, frankly, to apply across all sorts of facets of your life, including your creative evaluations, as whatever, writers, directors, DPs, actors, whatever you do, as well as your working relationships, cast, crew, etc., and as well as your family relationships, which is obvious because that's what we talked about. So I found that to be really, really helpful. Thanks, Anna, for helping me through that evaluation.
Yeah, thanks for doing it with me. And I thought that was helpful too. One other note that I wanted to add, because I feel like I got a lot of this process from one of my coaches named Stacy Bayman. And she summarizes it, like when she writes it down, she does WW for what worked, WDW for what didn't work, and WDD for what am I going to do it differently?
What do different?
And because I use this so often in so many different areas of my life, I really like those little shortcuts. I want to give her some credit for influencing this evaluation process that I use all the time and teaching it to me. And I also want to say I use it a little bit differently when I'm evaluating other people's work, because we talked about how you can only really evaluate yourself in
like if someone sends you a script or whatever.
Yeah, or if I'm watching a movie or something.
Interesting.
I like to still use this process, but I actually have found it works better for me to just focus on what do I love, like what's working and what am I going to steal. Like I think of Austin Kleon's Steal Like an Artist, and he's always he talks about always looking for things that you want to steal, that you love, and using those as inspiration for the work that you do. And he has a good balance between like not plagiarizing, but like learning from imitation and also learning from combining things and adding your own unique perspective. And so I feel like,
which is, and to his point, inevitable.
Yeah.
Even if you try and copy someone else's thing, it's like you will have done it yourself, and so it will feel different. But don't plagiarize.
Well, at first I started evaluating this way and saying, what would I do differently when I'd watch a movie? I just haven't found that that's been very helpful for me. So personally, I just like to say,
well, yeah, and
what do I want to steal? What do I love?
Yeah,
like,
I agree with that, because when you say like, what would I do differently if I had made this movie? It's like, well, I didn't make this movie,
right?
And
I don't know.
I'm not going to remake this movie. Well,
I don't know.
Sometimes
what I would have done.
I see movies where I'm like, I could maybe remake this one, but for the most part, yeah, it's like that's not really that productive. It's really like, why do I think they did it? That's a much better question than what would I do differently. Like, try and understand the artist. That's why they're communicating with you by making a movie. Don't try and like fix the artist. That's, even if you don't like the movie, just see like, why did they do that? Why do I think they did it? I think you're right. I think that yeah, so that's nice to have that evaluative process in consumption, I guess. So
yeah, you can use it that way too.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us on this episode today.
Yeah, if you like what you're learning, the best compliment you can give us is always a referral or a 5-star review. And if you want to take the tools you're learning here even deeper, the perfect way to do that is by joining the Film and Family program. The process that I teach in this program is simple, it's proven, and it has worked for thousands of people. It will work for you no matter what your goals are. And when you join, you're in for life, and it's risk-free. You'll either get the results you want, or I'll give you your money back. So, pretty good deal. You can check it out at invisiblemansion.com or by clicking the link in the show notes. We'll see you next time.